You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly ReQua, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk is sponsored by BarkBox. Every month, your pooch receives a theme box filled with treats and toys. Dogs get so excited for the shipment. For a free extra month, visit barkbox.com/vettalk and receive an extra month when you subscribe to a 6 to 12-month plan. Free shipping within the U.S. Please remember to subscribe at barkbox.com/vettalk. Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly ReQua. Today we're talking to one of our favorite vets, Dr. Laura Brown, owner of Green Tree Animal Hospital in Libertyville, Illinois, about seizures. Welcome, Laura.
Good morning, Polly.
Well, I wanted to tell you that we had a little scare last night. Chuck the pug woke up in the middle of the night, probably around 1 o'clock in the morning, and got really close to me. And then I started hearing his stomach gurgle, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to get sick on me. So I rushed him into the bathroom because I couldn't make it down the stairs fast enough, and he got sick. And then all of a sudden, his legs started to twitch, his body just was hard, and he just fell over. So I thought he was having a seizure, or he was choking. So I kind of put my fingers in his mouth to see what was going on. And then all of a sudden, he just snapped out of it and was back on all fours. So I wanted to bring you on and talk about what to do if your dog does have a seizure and, when to call the vet, what to do. I mean, it was just, it happened, of course, at 1 a.m, so nothing's open.
Right. Well, a couple things about what happened to Chuck. He had a thing called the vasovagal, so VASOVAGAL syncope, which happens. It's a common thing to happen to people sometimes when they get their blood drawn, they faint or pass out because of the sight of blood. So what happens is it's a physiologic response, and it causes like their blood pressure and their heart rate to drop pretty fast. So it definitely looks like a seizure, but as you found, it's self-limiting, meaning he got the oxygen flow came back and he jumped up and he was normal right away. So Chuck didn't have a true seizure, but it could look like a seizure. And that's all. Real seizures in dogs are also similar in that they have a beginning, like they pass out, fall down. Usually there's some sort of leg twitching, some mouth tremoring, chomping at the bit looking kind of thing, eyes rolling back kind of thing. But it lasts a lot longer than what happened to Chuck. Usually a lot longer, meaning only like maybe up to a minute or two, which seems like forever if it's truly a seizure.
Sure.
And then on their own definition of a seizure, it stops and they kind of look around and are like, what happened? There usually is a post-ictal phase, which means a little time after that where they're still a little dazed and confused. But within a short amount of time, 5-10 minutes usually, they're back to normal, like nothing ever happened.
And so what do you do? I mean, what?
Yeah, so in the midst of a seizure, there is nothing you can do. Because Chuck was vomiting, I get how you didn't want to have him choke, but most seizures that aren't connected to vomiting, and that's why Chuck's was the vasovagal thing, because it had the vomiting thing first. Most dogs that truly seizure, have no trigger. You don't know it's coming. Then they're laying there and all of a sudden they're seizuring. Like they aren't going to get sick or anything. So there's no trigger. They just are. And so when that is happening, it's not a good idea to put your hand in their mouth because most dogs in a true seizure are chomping uncontrollably and they don't know they're doing it. So you could get bit. So the main thing to do when a dog is seizuring is to make sure they're in a safe place. So they're like, if they're on the bed, they're not going to like jerk themselves off and fall off. They're not near a staircase where they might jerk down and fall down the stairs, or they're not on a hardwood floor where they might bang their heads. So maybe some pillows, a big, huge comforter or something to sort of kind of pad up around them until they stop seizuring on their own. Very rare do dogs do not choke on their tongues.
Okay.
I think in people, maybe they worry about that and have people put, somebody put something in across a person's mouth so that doesn't happen. I'm not sure about people, but in dogs, we don't worry about that. So it's really mostly about safety of the owner and keeping the dog kind of safe. I will say if it's 1 a.m. and the dog wakes up and it's, is done from the seizure and kind of looks back to normal, it doesn't mean you have to rush off to the emergency clinic. The reason you need to rush off to the emergency clinic would be if a seizure does not stop. So if it goes on longer than 5 minutes, you need to go with your dog seizuring.
Okay. What causes a seizure?
So that's a couple categories. There are probably the most common cause of seizures in dogs is epilepsy, which is usually diagnosed in a dog somewhere between 2 years old and 7 years old. So they're young dogs. It's sometimes genetic. Certain breeds like Cocker Spaniels, really high risk, prone to that. But they start out when they're young, and we call it epilepsy, a diagnosis of exclusion. So if somebody brings their pet into me and they're with their first seizure, usually by the time I see them, they're perfectly normal. I do a good physical exam, and then we do some baseline blood work, and we check things like blood sugar levels, calcium levels, liver enzymes, kidney enzymes, electrolytes, and 9 times out of 10, all that stuff's normal. And so then we're left with a diagnosis of epilepsy because we can't find anything else. I will say, in people, the first test they run on people with the seizure is an MRI or a CT to look at your brain, because seizures start in your brain. In dogs, that's the last test we do, unfortunately, because it requires a specialist that has a CT or an MRI machine, and the dogs have to go under general anesthesia to have that test performed. So we don't usually do that first. We do that after, if we're not getting control of seizures, or seizures are becoming very dramatic and worsening, because other causes of seizure that aren't benign are things like meningitis, encephalitis, brain tumors, low blood sugar, toxic exposure. So like ethylene glycol exposure could cause a seizure. Organophosphate, so fertilizer exposure, could cause seizures. So there's lots of things that do cause seizures that aren't benign. But usually those dogs are sick in and around the time of the seizure, not just normal 1 second having a seizure and are normal the next.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So after the seizure, after I just made sure he was fine, or whatever he had, and made sure he was fine, and then I just put him back on my bed.
Yep.
And he just slept the rest of the night.
Yep.
Is that what you would do?
Yep.
Okay.
Because unless he's continuing to seizure, breathing hard, seems distraught, or doesn't recover, even if you get him to the vet at that point, we aren't going to do anything except draw blood, maybe try and find out why he had that.
Okay.
But there's no emergency in that at that moment. If he doesn't stop seizuring, if he passes out and doesn't wake up, if he's vomiting and having diarrhea out both ends, he's trembling, his eyes are rolling back in his head, and he's not recovering, he needs to go to the emergency clinic. At that point, they put in IV catheters and give him drugs to stop seizures and do fluids, and then at that point try and diagnose why that's happening. Is it a toxin? Is he have meningitis? And then therefore treat. But usually if it's 30 seconds a minute, most of the time I think people, by the time they recognize what's going on, decide they need to go somewhere, get their clothes on, grab their coat, get their keys, and get the dog to the car, usually they're looking at them like, where are we going?
Right.
Fun.
Yeah.
So, for peace of mind at that point, definitely go to the emergency clinic for those owners that are worried about that. But if they're looking at you like, what do we do next? It doesn't necessarily have to be an emergency, unless 5 minutes later they're seizuring again. That's called a cluster seizure, and they're multiply, having a seizure 2 or 3 times in a row. I would recommend an emergency visit. If your regular vet's open, we see them, we bring them into the hospital, we put an IV catheter in, and we keep an eye on them all day and give them IV drugs if they need it so they don't keep seizuring while we're waiting on diagnostic tests and deciding what potential anti-seizure medications they may need to go on going forward.
Okay. One interesting thing that the vet said when I talked to her after Chuck's episode was to next time take careful notes, but not necessarily written, but get your iPhone and video it.
Perfect. That's a great idea, because a lot of times in the heat of the moment, people are so stressed about what's happening if they've never seen a seizure that they can't tell me how long it lasted, how severe or dramatic it was. And so if I could see it, it's helpful to tell the difference. So for instance, to tell the difference between what Chuck the Pug did really truly wasn't a classic seizure and what a seizure really looks like. So the other thing, like what Chuck did called syncope, dogs with heart disease can have a syncopal episode, so pass out, and it kind of looks like a seizure, but it's really not. It's really their heart missing a beat and having an arrhythmia. So see, that can look like a seizure too, sort of like what Chuck did.
Yeah.
And so that's why it definitely is encouraged, and I don't want to mislead people. If your dog has some sort of episode that looks like a seizure, yes, you should go to the vet as soon as possible, but it doesn't have to be at 2 a.m. unless, it doesn't have to be an emergency visit unless your dog does not recover and act normal right away.
Okay.
But you should definitely seek veterinary care within the next 24, 48 hours.
Well, it's always an adventure having pets.
It is. You learn something new every day.
Right. Well, we certainly appreciate you being on the podcast today, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you. I look forward to it, too. I always learn something new as well.
Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Okay. Thanks, Polly. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk is sponsored by BarkBox. What is BarkBox? BarkBox is a delivery of 4 to 6 natural treats and super fun toys curated around a surprise theme each month. Choose a dog size, choose a plan, 1, 6, or 12 months, and receive your BarkBox in the mail. BarkBox is committed to making dogs happy, working with local and independent businesses. BarkBox supports shelters, rescues, and nonprofits, helping dogs find their forever home. Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk loves their mission. For a free extra month, visit barkbox.com/vet talk and receive an extra month when you subscribe to a 6 to 12 month plan.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.